Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Centrify Customer Success Expert Hour on MFA. I'm Nick Micah, Senior Tech Support Engineer at Centrify, and I'm here to answer some common MFA questions asked by our customers. If you'd like to submit your own MFA-related questions, please enter it in the QA box on the webinar screen. I will attempt to answer as many audience questions as possible during the event. Without further ado, let's get started. So, first off, what is MFA? So MFA is multi-factor authentication. Traditionally, when a user would authenticate, they would just use a username and password. With MFA in place, they have to provide 1, 2, 3, or more forms of authentication to forms of identification in order to authenticate. And so why is it important? Like I said, traditionally, username and password is used to log in. Increasingly, more and more usernames and passwords are becoming less secure just because attackers are getting more sophisticated, right? So MFA reinforces the password by, it reinforces the password by requiring more forms of authentication, right? So when someone goes to authenticate, if they steal a password and try to authenticate using that password, they will have to provide, other forms like email or SMS. So how does it prevent attacks? Like I said, when you go to authenticate and you put in the password, it will prompt you for other forms of authentication that a potential attacker couldn't possibly have. So what kind of attacks does it prevent? So anything that has to do with the password. So these days there's phishing attacks, there's spear phishing attacks, and not to mention processing speeds of CPUs have increased. So brute force attacks have become an actual threat, whereas in the past, brute forcing attacks would take way too long and require way too much hardware and money. But nowadays, further developments like GPU password cracking, rainbow tables have provided similar advantages for attackers. GPGPU cracking, for example, can produce more than around 500 million passwords per second, even on lower-end gaming hardware. Depending on the particular software, rainbow tables can be used to crack 14-character alphanumeric passwords in about 160 seconds. So purpose-built cards, like those used by security agencies, offer 10 times performance at a minuscule fraction of GPU power draw. A password database alone doesn't stand a chance against such methods when it's a real target of interest. And especially these days with cloud computing, like Amazon, for example, you can rent Amazon servers in the cloud and cluster them together quickly and efficiently in order to crack passwords. So if someone wants to get your password bad enough and they manage to get it or manage to get a hash of it, cracking that password is becoming increasingly more possible rapidly. So combined with MFA, what other technologies can you use to provide the best security? So MFA will help reinforce the password, but it can also be used to help reinforce other forms of login, like SAML, for example, token-based auth. With SAML, you take away one password, right? So, for example, with the identity solution, you log into the portal, and then when you go to launch an application, traditionally you would have, upwards of 15, 20 applications in your organization or enterprise, and each one of those would have their own password, right? And so that just leaves a whole lot of potential out there in order for passwords to be compromised. So MFA can help with that, but you can also use SAML in conjunction with MFA. SAML is token-based auth, so it takes away the password. So there's no password in communications between the IDP and the SP. So what challenges do we support? So we support a whole range of challenges. Push notifications, so we have a mobile app for MDM. We support voice calls, so you can take a phone call and approve a login attempt. We support text messages, so you can get a text message on a mobile device, and then you have to open it up, click on it, and then approve. We support oath-compliant tokens and soft tokens. Password, of course. Email, so you can send an email to the user's email address. And, you know, with all of these methods, right, there's ways to restrict access to these, so you can even make them more secure. There's also security question. Smart cards and derived credentials. Derived credentials are credentials that you can put on mobile devices that come from smart cards. And then radius as well. So if you have any third-party radius solutions, we can also integrate with those for MFA. So when it comes to the challenges, there's three different kinds, right? There's something you know, something you possess, and then something you are. So something that you know is information that a user must be able to provide to log in, such as IDs, usernames, passwords, PIN codes, answers to questions, those sorts of things. So with, you know, these hacking attempts these days, or these methods, you know, there's ways to get that information, something you know, right? If you know somebody really well, there's a good chance that you can guess whatever verification questions are being used. So you need to combine that with either something you have or something you are. And so something you have might be anything that a user must physically have in order to log in, such as a security token, a one-time password token, such as like Google Authenticator, that generates a code that's only good for, I think, upwards of 30 seconds, and then it regenerates a new one, a key fob, an ID card, a SIM card, you know, a smartphone, right? So for SMS, for push notifications, those sorts of things. And then something you are. So you know, biometrics in the past didn't used to be a reality. It was really expensive, not very reliable. But as we move forward, there's biometrics available to the general public in most mobile devices, right? Cell phones have them, tablets have them, laptops have them. So you can also use those as a challenge, and those are arguably probably one of the hardest things to replicate or steal. So what are MFA's best practices? The most important thing about using MFA is to simply use it everywhere that you can. Even pieces of information or apps that you may not think are critical to your business or, you know, your customers' data is absolutely critical. Most of the battle when trying to infiltrate something or hack something is information gathering and enumeration. So if a user that doesn't have admin rights or elevated privileges gets compromised, or if an application that gets compromised that isn't necessarily mission critical to your day-to-day operations, doesn't mean that it's any less important, right? Because that's just getting your foot in the door, so to speak. So you should use it everywhere that you can, and you should use the strongest challenges that you have the ability to use. So are there typical MFA authentication systems that I should consider? So just on my last talking point there, the best challenges arguably are those that can be answered by the user and only the user. For example, if you combine like a security question and a phone call, that may not be the most secure way to do it because anybody can answer the phone and approve. And like I said earlier, if you know someone quite well, there's a good chance that you can guess their security questions. And largely, the security question is really dependent upon the user to take it upon themselves to set a secure question. You know, there might be users that just want to move past MFA as fast as possible, so they put a simple question with a simple answer, ultimately, you know, defeating the purpose of using MFA. So use the strongest ones you can. When it comes to a mobile device, for example, when it comes to using push notifications, SMS, even email these days, you should be enforcing not only MFA to access the application or systems that they're trying to, but on the device itself, you should also be enforcing some form of MFA, and that goes back to, you know, PIN codes, strong passwords, biometrics. And then if you even want to get more secure on the Centrify mobile app that does the push notifications from our cloud solution, you can also enforce a PIN code on the app itself. So now if you allow a user to use, say, password and push notification to log in, they're going to have to enter their password, and then the push notification, they're going to have to get their device, unlock the device itself, and then unlock the app, and then approve the notification. So you have multiple factors of authentication. You know, traditionally, MFA may have been referred to as two-factor authentication, but there's a reason why we call it multi-factor, because you can combine multiple methods in order to authenticate. A huge part of IT administration these days is moving towards user self-service, so that, you know, when users lock their accounts or when they need to change their passwords, they don't have to call the help desk and tie up the IT department in order to do those functions. But self-service, again, it possibly be another attack vector. So it's important to use MFA there as well. So typically, we would enforce, when you set it up with Centrify, we would require one more factor than you require to log in. So for example, if you require two factors to log in, say password and SMS, then you would have to choose a third factor in order to do self-service. So you would have to combine password, text message, and a phone call, or any form of those three, and you can choose which ones you want. They're not locked, you know. So you can say, in this scenario, I want this. In this scenario, I want that. And then this is the talking point here I was just saying, is it possible to enforce MFA differently across my apps and infrastructure? So absolutely. Once you integrate all of your apps, all of your infrastructure, you can apply whatever challenges independently to different systems. So if you want to make some not as stringent and some, you know, very stringent and, you know, very controlled, you can do that. So how can I roll out MFA across my organization? So with Centrify's Identity Service, you integrate everything that you have, and you know, that can consist of, you know, on-premise, that can consist of cloud apps, that can consist of you know, Windows machines. We truly do MFA everywhere, right? So once you get everything integrated into Centrify, to roll out MFA it's actually pretty easy. Like I said, you create roles. Everything in Centrify is role-based. So you create roles, and then with the roles, you apply policy to the roles, and within the policy is where you configure, you know, everything that you want to apply. So it's actually quite simple to configure. Once you create your roles, your policies, and then your authentication profiles, it doesn't take very long. So how long does it actually take to configure MFA? I think you could probably have, once you have everything integrated into Centrify to configure MFA, it probably takes minutes, not very long at all. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start answering questions here. It looks like we have a few. So we have found that mobile authenticator is the easiest, but that many users struggle with the idea that you need to use their old phone to set up a new one when they upgrade. We have 2 to 3 people every Monday with this scenario. Set up one when they upgrade. We found that mobile authenticator is the easiest, but many users struggle with the idea that you need to use their old phone to set up a new one when they upgrade. So are you saying that when you upgrade to a new phone that you can't set up MFA on the new device because all the MFA options are on the old device? I guess I don't understand the question. If you could clarify that, I'd be happy to answer it. They tend to buy a new phone but can't set up MFA because they no longer have their old phone. Okay. So there should be a way to work around that. I would suggest that you open a support case, and we can take a look at that. Okay, do you support token-based authentication for Linux instances, specifically Active Directory integrated Linux EC2 instances? Yeah, I believe we do. So we offer MFA for Linux machines, Windows machines, apps. So like I was saying earlier, once you get your machine integrated to Active Directory, I'm assuming you're using our CSS product, then you set up, the cloud piece, then yes, you can enforce MFA on Linux integrated systems. Okay, and let's see. So do users have any control to disable or enable MFA? So no, they don't. They don't at all. So when you configure MFA, you put users into the role, and then you apply policies to those roles. So whatever policy you apply is the policy that they will have to abide by. So that's for email. For example, if they go to launch email and they can't perform a second factor authentication, then they won't be able to get to it. So they have to comply or they don't get access. Now, there is a scenario in where, let's say, a user goes to authenticate and they don't have a valid factor for whatever reason. They lost their phone. They're in a remote location, something like that. Then the admin can actually go in and do an Mfa Unlock, which lasts for 10 minutes. So the user will be able to get in and hopefully reconfigure one of their MFA options, whether that's a token, whether that's a security question, phone number, something like that. And then going forward, they'll be able to get in by themselves without having to call the admin. There's also a policy option to allow users without a valid MFA factor to log in. That's obviously not recommended because it kind of defeats the purpose of MFA, but it's there. Are there any additional charges for calls and text messages? No. So it all comes from our cloud. The only thing that is charged is whatever you're paying for the cell phone. Okay, so we would like our users to have for MFA client. How difficult is it to integrate Symantec VIP with Centrify? So that's along the same lines as Google Authenticator. So when a user logs into the user portal, if you've enabled that MFA factor for them, then what they'll see is a QR code. They scan the QR code on their mobile device, and then then you go into the VIP app and configure it. So it's not hard at all, and it doesn't take very much time at all. Okay, let's see. Can I integrate my Cisco ASA for two-factor authentication with Centrify? Yeah, you can. That's one of the things we definitely support. All right, let's see. Just 1 second here. So one of the things someone's put in the chat here is that they have a MFA bypass policy that gives users 2 days to set up MFA, but it enforces it as soon as they have set it up. So that also may be an option to configuring MFA for anybody that's out there considering how to cut over to it. All right, 1 sec here. So to the person that was asking about integrating with the ASA, are you looking to use radius authentication for the VPN, or how would you like to integrate it if you had a perfect scenario? I'll just give them a few seconds here to respond. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll answer another one while we wait for that one. Oh, actually, it is with LDAP. Yeah, so you should be able to do that just fine with LDAP. We do support LDAP. We support Active Directory, and we support Google Directory. So I know there's other forms of multi-factor authentication that use LDAP, such as Duo, and we've successfully integrated with them before. We've integrated with Cisco. So you should be able to go ahead and integrate with LDAP with the ASA. So I guess there's no need for, oh, sorry. Can you use this MFA with Cisco Meraki devices? So yes, you can. With Meraki, so anything that supports like Radius, for example. I know a lot of Cisco products use Radius. I think we've done a few integrations with Meraki as well. So yes. So I guess there's no need for MFA when zero sign-on is enabled with certificates. Can you confirm if ZSO is secure enough? Yeah, so when you set up ZSO or IWA, for example, there's an option in the authentication policy in order to accept that as strongly auth or to satisfy all of your MFA requirements. So it's really upon you. If you think that's secure enough, which it's pretty secure, then you don't have to enforce MFA, but there is an option to enforce MFA on top of that if you'd like to. Can you redirect me to any document to do with two-factor with the Cisco ASA? So if you could do us a favor, and if you post in our community after this is over, then we will respond with anything that we have for that. All right, just 1 second here, guys. All right, can you explain how this would assist with Anomalous logins or impossible travel scenarios? I'm not familiar with those scenarios. Can you expand a little bit for me? Logins from very far distances, say U.S., then South Africa, 20 minutes apart. Ah, got it. Okay. So in the policy configuration, you can configure whether or not you want to enforce MFA by IP address. So if they're, for example, at a certain IP, then you can say, don't allow, or enforce MFA, or always allow. And then in specific applications themselves, right, you can go into the advanced section of that application, and there is a script in there, so you can do the logic like if IP address equals XYZ, or if the range is this, or if the country equals this, then don't allow, or enforce MFA, those sorts of things. Yeah, so the next question was, would that apply to mobile devices? Yes, it would. So any authentication attempt that comes from the user, whether that's from a mobile device or whether that's from a computer, will apply. All right, just another second here. So there's one thing that I wanted to mention, is that we have an analytics service coming that's going to make adaptive MFA even better. So, for example, once you turn it on, it takes all this data that you have in your tenant. So when users log in, where they log in from, what devices, how often they log in. So all of this data is taken in and consumed, and then eventually, once this data is compiled and there's enough of it, then MFA will apply adaptively to users. So to the person that was asking about impossible travel scenarios, right? So our analytics engine will pick up on these sorts of things. So if someone logs in from, California, and then 20 minutes later is trying to log in somewhere in China or South Africa or something like that, the analytics system will catch that and then prevent those logins. And so not only that, but all this data that is combined and analyzed is also available to you at a dashboard. So you can view all this data, and you can even see users and their risk assessment. So, this user logs in from all these different places, they're going to have a higher risk. And, if they have a higher risk, they're going to be prompted for MFA more often. Whereas if you have users that only log in from their desk, and they're it's the same time, same machine, same browser, same IP address, then they're going to be prompted for MFA less. So that's going to be pretty cool. So there's some enhancements for that coming out in 17.6. So if you're currently a customer, watch for that. If you're not a customer, then we'd be happy to get you in touch with someone that can, help you out with seeing that or demoing that or answering any potential questions that you may have outside of this session. So are you able to receive alerts in the event you had an account suspected of being compromised due to impossible travel? So currently, there's not alerts for that. I believe that's something that's on a roadmap and then we're working on. But you can, like I was just saying a minute ago, you can see all of that data, but you can't have it delivered to you as it happens. And then another question that we have often is there a way for us to report on MFA events within our company? So I'll answer that in two parts. Currently today, yes. So if you go to the admin portal and then you go to the reporting section, you'll see a bunch of canned reports under security, and there's a few for MFA events. So if you open up those reports, then you can set your dates. So I think by default it's the last 30 days, but you can also edit that report to be longer or shorter, and then it will show you all of the MFA and what happened, who did it, when it happened, etc. And then when the analytics service comes out, all of that information again will be in dashboards with a whole bunch of different widgets that you can add, remove. You can change the data in them. You can change the time frames in them. So when you log into the service, the first thing you will see is that dashboard with all of that information available immediately. Okay, so is MFA functionality linked to an add-on product licensing cost? No, it is not. So it's actually included with everything. When you buy the product, there's no additional fees for any MFA at all. All right, one sec here. Let's see if we have any other questions. Okay, so is it possible for MFA applications to behave differently between internal and remote users? So yeah, this is one of those things that you apply in the policy. So when you go to the login authentication policy, there's a grid with a bunch of different scenarios. So you can say IP address, so inside the corporate IP range, outside the corporate IP range. You can specify if an identity cookie is present, if it's not present, those sorts of things. So if a user, you can say if a user is outside of the IP range and they don't have an identity cookie, and an identity cookie just means that the user has logged in from that specific machine on that specific browser before. So if a user is outside of the network and there's no identity cookie present, meaning that the user is not, inside the network and they've never logged into the service before from that device, then do X, Y, Z. Adversely, you can say if the user is inside the corporate network and they have an identity cookie, or even if they don't have an identity cookie, then you can say just by being inside the corporate network, then they can just use their password or whatever you want to do. So you can make outside the network, outside the network have logged in before. You can make that secure. You can say outside of the network never logged in before at all. You can say deny completely, and then inside the network never logged in. Whatever you want to do. So it really comes down to how you want to restrict how users move through your infrastructure. and how you want the product to behave. So, and like I was saying earlier, there's the different MFA challenges are just more secure by nature. So if you have, applications that you don't want users to access without having to provide, multiple forms of authentication that are very strong, you can do so. All right, one sec here. Let me check the QA in the chat. Okay, so this is a great question. When working with Windows MFA, how does authentication work in offline mode? So if you're offline, so we do MFA for Windows machines. So when a user goes to log into their Windows machine, they have to provide some form of authentication. Now, when you're inside the network, that may not be such an issue because you're online, everything's connected. But if you're offline, you don't have network connectivity, then how does that work? Because if you can't connect, then there's no way to provide that other form of authentication. So what we do is we allow users to set up an offline passcode for situations like this, so they don't get locked out outside of the network or when they're completely disconnected from any network. So when we detect that they aren't connected, then we will allow them to authenticate with a passcode that they've already specified beforehand. All right, one second here, guys. Okay, so when we set up authentication policies, you see challenge 1 and challenge 2, and see some factors. How does that work? So, for example, can a user use the same authentication factor 2 times? No, they cannot. So earlier when I said that you can go and look at reporting to see what happened with MFA events, there's actually an error that says user does not have enough available options to satisfy challenge, which means that if they go to authenticate with their password and they use that for option number 1, because you can provide, so you can say option number 1, I want them to be able to use X, Y, and Z. And, option number 2, I want them to be able to A, B, C. So if password is checked in both of those scenarios, right, that means that they will not be able to go password on challenge 1 and password on challenge 2. Once that challenge is used up, it's completely out of the mix for that authentication attempt. So when they move on to the second challenge, they're going to have to specify some other form of authentication. All right, one sec here. Let me check the QA and the chat. One sec here, guys. Sorry. Okay, so are the user passcodes specific to devices, offline login? Yes, yes, they are. And you have to set them before you go offline too. They cannot be set once you're already offline. All right. Do you support YubiKeys for MFA? Yeah, so if you have YubiKeys, so tokens, then we do integrate with them. So you can do HOTP, and I believe you can also do TOTP. So whatever you guys like to use. Once you get it configured, you'll see it as a valid authentication option. So when a user goes to authenticate, they can choose that Yubico. And we also support the SKUs. So the Yubicos cycle through codes, right? And once the code, and so it creates a new code, and I think it's like they do 12 ahead. And so if a user goes through those 12, then the key becomes locked. So we also support that function to when if an attacker gets a hold of a key or whatever and they're trying to use it maliciously, we'll realize it's locked and we'll not prevent that. We'll prevent that authentication attempt from happening. All right, one sec here. Let me check the QA in the chat windows. Great question. If MFA is enabled, would this cause any issues for SSO used in conjunction with Office 365? So this is also going to be a two-part answer. And the reason why is because of how Microsoft handles authentication attempts. So there's largely two technologies that Microsoft uses when you authenticate, and this is for clients, right? So there is ADOL, and then there is non-ADOL. So ADOL, which is now known as active authentication or modern authentication, does support MFA. So any authentication attempt on a client that supports it, note that's important, right? So if the client doesn't support MFA, then MFA won't be enforced, right? It'll just fall back to the non-ADOL. So if you have like the Outlook client for iOS or Android, for example, when a user goes to authenticate, they'll actually be rerouted to the Centrify user portal inside the client. It's kind of like an OAuth situation where when you go to log into something, a website that supports, B2B like Google or Facebook, you go to a website, click on sign in with Google. So it's kind of this similar behavior. When a user goes to authenticate to the Office 365 client, they'll be redirected to the user portal, and then they'll be subject to any MFA challenges that have been configured. And once they complete those, then they'll reroute back to the application and mail will flow like usual. So ADOL clients, are any of the new Microsoft Office suite products, and then the Outlook app on mobile devices. And then there's non-ADOL devices where if you have MFA configured on non-ADOL devices, or non-ADOL clients, excuse me, so that since the non-ADOL clients don't support MFA, they don't even know it exists. So it would not interfere with those clients. They'll be able to authenticate and use ActiveSync just as they have before. And then on the browser side of things, of course, it will redirect as long as you have federation in place. And the very key piece for all of what I just explained is federation has to be in place with Centrify so that any login attempt to that specific Office 365 domain routes to Centrify first. We verify the identity of the user, apply any MFA, and then send them back. So from the browser, as long as federation is in place, then they will be redirected to Centrify to log in. So, right now, it's kind of, at this point in time, it's kind of a mix of non-MFA clients for Office 365 and MFA clients for Office 365. Going forward, I'd be willing to bet that, most clients in the future are going to be modern authentication, ADOS supported, and they'll be able to take advantage of MFA. So it's actually it's not going to cause any issues. It actually adds extra functionality. Did that answer your question completely? Okay. So are there any specific MFA considerations if we have a cast like NetScaler in between Centrify and our service? So yes, there can be. So there's in most of those scenarios there is a domain whitelisting setting so that our service is recognized and authenticates. So if that's not done, we're going to reject the MFA because a lot of the times, with those sorts of devices, they'll strip things out of packets or they'll add things into packets. And when that happens and the requests and the responses, they don't come back to us like we would expect them to, just to be safe, we'll go ahead and just deny that attempt. All right, just another second here. Let me check the questions. All right, if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or the QA box now, and then we'll wait a few more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So we'll just give a few more minutes for people to post questions here. So I just wanted to point out that our Mfa Everywhere Solution. So what does it what does it include? What devices and endpoints and services can be protected? So it supports a broad range of enterprise resources, thousands of software as a service applications, dozens of on-premise applications, hundreds of server operating systems, as well as VPNs, network devices, and what's even cooler, and I think anyways, is that we support MFA for privileged command execution and SSH access to servers deployed, on-prem and in a infrastructure as a service environment. So if a user wants to use elevated commands, or if they want to log in as a root, then they're going to have to provide some form of MFA. So, if an account gets compromised on a server, then they try to use root, they're going to have to use MFA in order to use those privileged commands. So that's pretty cool. All right. Again, so if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Okay, could you explain how the token-based auth works for Linux? Can the client cache the token and allow passwordless SSH for a configurable duration? So with that, so we can do that in a couple ways. I think the way that most of our customers doing it is with Kerberos. So if you have our CSS product and you authenticate, if both machines are set up to support SSH Kerberos, then yes, once you authenticate an SSH into the machine, then that session will be valid as long as the Kerberos session is set to be valid for. So I think traditionally, right, getting end users to adopt MFA has been somewhat difficult because it kind of throws a wrench into their flow, right? So the thing about Centrify is we make the MFA really easy to do. So a user goes to log in, right, and let's say you allow them to use their password. They use their password, and then they get a drop-down menu of all of their available options. And if they get an SMS, they can just tap on the message and automatically authenticate. If they get a phone call, they just answer the phone call and press 1. So it's still very secure, multi-factor authentication, but we're making it easier for the end user to adopt instead of being, this brutal process. All right, if anybody has any other questions, please put them in now. Oh, here we go. Okay. So is that feature compatible with all operating systems in regard to the elevated permissions function? Yes, so that's compatible with all those Linux distributions that I had just mentioned a minute ago. So any Linux distribution that we support will be able to take advantage of that feature. With Mac, it's currently not supported, and then on Windows, I believe it is supported. Is Centrify Express good enough for that, or do I need a license? So for are you talking about for the elevated permissions? Oh, for the Kerberos. Yes, the Express will do that. The Express will do that just fine. So the only thing you can't do with the Express product for CSS is you cannot apply policy. So if you need to change those SSH configurations to support that authentication type, then you can do so, but you're going to have to do it manually. You can't do it with our policy if you're using Express. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for coming. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up now. If you guys have any other questions, or if you have any questions about anything I've touched on today, please visit the community at community.centrify.com and post your questions there, and we will answer them. So I hope you all have a great day, and thanks for coming. Talk to you later.